So this is the first instalment of the Business Management IB revision notes, looking at Chapter 1. The content of these revision notes has come directly from our Paul Hoang textbook. All the definitions are as found in that textbook, and these revision notes are meant as a summary of the content of that textbook. It is not going to go into every section in detail, so please do use the textbook when you want to look at something a little bit closer. This is meant to simply overview. If we start with Chapter 1's chapter contents, there are 7 sections to Chapter 1. This video will focus on the first 3 sections, and the next instalment will focus on sections 4 to 7. So today we're going to look at Introduction to Business Management, Types of Organisations and Organisational Objectives. So starting with the Introduction to Business Management, the first element to consider are the functions that businesses operate under. The main functions of business management, which are covered throughout the course, are separated into the 3 headings of human resources, finance and accounts, and marketing. Human resources deals with anything to do with employees, anything to do with the people in the business. This might be planning for the workforce, as in how many people do we need? Are we expanding? Are we shrinking? This could be to do with recruitment, hiring new employees, or training them, or appraising them. It could be to do with dismissal and redundancies, so getting rid of staff, whether that be through something that they've done wrong or through the fact that their job no longer exists or we can't afford to pay them anymore. And it also deals with the outsourcing of human resources. So when we get other companies or other individuals external from our own organisation to do certain tasks for us. Finance and accounts is anything to do with the management of the organisation's money. This is an important section in the sense that the finance managers and the finance department is responsible for reporting the finance of the business to its stakeholders. And this is part of the ethics and the trustworthiness of the business. Marketing is the final strategy. This is covered mainly in Chapter 4 and looks at how the business satisfies the needs and wants of customers. So we have the 7 P's of the marketing mix. The first 4 which specify specifically for products, which is price, product, place and promotion. And then we have the additional 3 P's of the extended marketing mix, which are people, process and physical evidence. And together those 7 P's make up marketing of services. So we have the marketing of products and the marketing of services. Again, that will be covered in more detail in Chapter 4. The role of an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur. These 2 individuals are key whether we're talking about a startup business or a successful individual business. Our textbook defines an entrepreneur as an individual who plans, organises and manages a business taking on financial risk in doing so. So this is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was the co-founder of Apple and he would be described as an entrepreneur. Okay, so he took financial risk in starting Apple. His characteristics could be described as creative and innovative, a leader. He had the ideas, okay, and he took that personal risk in enabling those ideas to come to fruition. An intrapreneur has the same characteristics as an entrepreneur, but does not take his own personal financial risk. He works as part of a larger organisation. So he takes risks, but as part of an organisation. So this gentleman here is Paul Butchite, and he's an employee of Google. And he is credited as the creator of Gmail. He supposedly programmed the first working version of Gmail in just one day. He's been their lead developer ever since, and he would be described as an intrapreneur. Now obviously companies want to keep hold of their entrepreneurs because they're important individuals in the company. They're creative and innovative, just like the entrepreneur is. But they also don't want to lose their entrepreneurs to the risk of them becoming entrepreneurs. Because of course if an entrepreneur leaves a company and sets up his own business, that business may then be a rival or competitor to the original organisation. There are 5 steps to starting a business. The first step is to write a business plan. This is a document which is going to outline all of the objectives and the aims for the business. It's going to talk about the finance, it's going to talk about where the sources of finance are coming from, it's going to look at the product or service that the business is going to offer, who it's going to sell it to, the market that it's going to operate within, and it's going to outline the targets for the business in the early stages. This will often include certain financial forecasts. It's important to have a business plan so that you can obtain your startup capital. Startup capital being that money that you need to first initiate your business. A lot of the time, businesses will either use their own savings or try and obtain a loan, either from a bank or from an investor, to finance their startup business. So if you've got your own savings, this may come from family wealth, personal wealth. It may come from having been made redundant from a company and having a payout. It may come from having inherited money from family members, and this is often a reason why organisations begin. Obtaining loans is a little bit more difficult because you have to prove to the person you're getting the loan from, and of course you have to pay it back. And that's where the business plan often comes into play, because the business plan helps to prove to those investors, whether they be banks or other organisations or individuals, that your business is worth the investment. Once you've got your startup capital, you have to obtain business registration. This is a legal status. It differs from country to country depending upon where you operate, but businesses usually have to be registered in some way depending upon the type of organisation. Once you're legally registered as a business, businesses then have to open bank accounts, and a business bank account is different to a personal bank account. Business bank accounts allow businesses to manage their money separate from the personal finance of the owners. So the inflow of cash into the business will go into the business's bank account rather than to the owners, as the outgoings of cash, so the payments and loan payments, etc., payments to suppliers, will come out of the business's bank account. Lastly, in the steps to starting up a business is the marketing of that business, and this goes on throughout the whole process. Again, these are the 7 P's of the marketing mix that I was talking about before. Product, price, promotion and place are the 4 P's. These are standard and higher level and cover the marketing of products, whereas the additional 3 P's, together with the first 4, cover the marketing of services, people, process and physical evidence. We'll look at these in a little bit more detail in chapter 4. So what kind of business are we talking about? Well, we first define our businesses by either private or public sector. Now, that means, is the organisation owned by an individual, or is the organisation owned by the government? So when we talk about private sector organisations, we're often talking about companies, and these organisations are owned by individuals. Okay, sometimes partnerships and groups, but they're not in the control of the government. Sometimes you have these organisations and companies that are owned in the public sector. Public sector organisations are under the control of the government. Now, in most countries, these will provide goods and services that may be underprovided or not fully available in the private sector, perhaps because they're less profitable or they're larger or more complex to provide. So, for example, healthcare, education and emergency services will often operate in the public sector offered by the government. These are still businesses. They still operate as businesses. They have cash ins and cash out. When we're talking about the private sector, so owned by individuals, not the government, we have 4 types of profit-making organisations: sole traders, partnerships, private limited companies and public limited companies. So if we start with the sole trader, this over here, our market stall, is a classic example of a sole trader. A sole trader is an individual who has full responsibility for their organisation. They can hire employees, but they themselves manage all of the inflows and outflows of the business. They don't have to share their profits with anyone, which means that they have full control over their business. It also means they're fully personally responsible for any of the debts of that business. Sole traders will often struggle to find large sums of external finance, Although it's not unheard of for sole traders to be very successful small businesses, opening stores or small chains that are still managed by a single individual and simply employing various employees to fulfill certain roles. Then we think about partnerships. Partnerships are useful because they enable different individuals to come together to share their best skills. Law firms are often partnerships. A partnership agreement means that each partner will pay into the startup of the business. Partnerships, like sole traders, are fully responsible for their own business. They are fully liable, is the term we use, meaning that they're financially responsible for how the business operates. Partnerships require a deed of partnership. It's a contract, and it outlines exactly what each partner will contribute towards the business and what each partner will take out. Partnerships can become difficult if different partners have different opinions of how the business should operate. Then we have private limited companies, and my example on this screen here is Uber. Uber is still a private limited company, which means that they don't trade on the stock market, but they do have limited liability. Limited liability means that the finances of the company are held separately from the finances of the individual owners. So if the business goes bankrupt, it's not the individual owner's bank account that has to pay the debts. Now, a private limited company will sell shares, but not to the public. Private limited companies sell shares within their organisation, usually to friends, family, employees, local investors, etc. But it's all controlled within the company. A private limited company will benefit from having a limited liability, but will not be able to generate the kind of share capital that a public limited company will, because a public limited company sells their shares on the stock market. Public limited companies, just like private, have limited liability. So their personal owners are not fully responsible for the finances of that company on their own financial account. Microsoft, Apple, big businesses, often publicly limited companies that trade on the stock market. That means that individuals and other companies can buy shares in that company. Once you have a share in a company, you have a say in how it's run. So both private and public limited companies risk the loss of certain control when they sell shares. It's also important to note that public limited companies can generate huge amounts of money through sale of shares on the stock market. The most important time for a public limited company probably is when they first sell their shares. The first time that they offer their shares is called an IPO, an initial public offering. And this is when those big companies can generate huge sums of money to invest in the growth of their business by selling a percentage of the control of their company to individuals and company investors. So aside from the profit-making organisations that we've looked at, we have for-profit social enterprises as well. A social enterprise, instead of a company, like we just talked about, social enterprises, rather than being profit-making for the benefit of the owners, they make profit for social good. They make profit for giving back to the social benefit of the local environment or the local people, or for healthcare or education. Social enterprises are supposed to give back to community. There are three types: cooperatives, microfinance providers, and public-private partnerships. So an example of a cooperative is Crédit Agricole, which is a bank in France. These are for-profit, meaning they make profit, but that profit is reinvested into the organisation for the benefit of its members. So cooperatives are run by their members. Members could be the employees or the customers. In the case of Crédit Agricole, if you're a customer of Crédit Agricole, you are also a member of their organisation. So what you put into the organisation also generates back what you get out of the organisation. So they're not operating on the same kinds of profit levels as a for-profit company. However, they have social objectives. Microfinance providers are an interesting little group because they operate a little bit like a bank, but they give loans to specifically small businesses. Those loans are usually for the startup of their business activities, and usually in developing nations and developing countries. So this is about enabling disadvantaged members of society to gain access to essential finance. And this is about the starting of new business organisations and new business opportunities. Microfinance providers still expect their loans to be paid back with interest, just like big banks, but they provide much smaller sums of money. Lastly, we have public-private partnerships. So we've just described the public sector and the private sector. Well, a public-private partnership is when the public and private sectors work together in order to jointly provide a good or service. And this is when it benefits both the public and private group. An example of this would be Hong Kong Disneyland, where the Hong Kong government have worked with Disney to ensure that Disneyland took place, that the organisation was able to succeed in that area. It benefited the local community within jobs and investment, and it benefited the company, Disney, from the expansion into a new market. There's various examples of public-private partnerships, for example, the building of the London Olympic Stadium, the Sydney Harbour Bridge, all are examples of where the public and private sectors have worked together. Private sector often being able to offer very specialist skills, whether that be building skills or finance skills, marketing skills, etc. And the public sector often putting up a lot of finance, a lot of money, in order to get the benefit of what that organisation is then going to offer back to their local community. Then we have non-profit social enterprises. So non-profit social enterprises, their purpose is not to make a profit. Okay, the money that they make goes specifically to their objectives, to their causes. You have two types: non-governmental organisations, shortened to NGOs, and charities. An NGO is a non-profit enterprise that operates in the private sector. So instead of it being controlled by the government, then this is a charitable organisation which donates all of the funds that it generates through donation and through subsidies of the government to their specific causes. A charity works mainly on voluntary support. So charities have lots of volunteers that work in charity shops, that work in fundraising drives, etc. And the money generated goes specifically to their causes. NGOs tend to employ their staff, whereas charities will tend to rely mainly on volunteers, even though they will have to employ a certain level of their staff just to be able to operate. So, objectives. Starting with the vision and the mission statement, if we take the idea of the mountain range over here, the top of the mountain is the vision. This is where we want to go. Okay, it outlines an organisation's aspirations, where they want to be in the long and distant future. They're usually very, very overly optimistic, very vague statements. Gap, the clothing company, has a vision statement that says we want to clothe the world. Adidas says they want to be the leading sports brand in the world. These are statements that describe where they want to go. Whereas the mission statement talks about how you're going to get there, what you actually do. Okay, so this is a list of the business's core values and actions. Okay, so in the case of the International School of Monaco, our mission statement says that we will work in partnership with parents to do everything we can to enable students to become academically successful, to be caring individuals, to communicate in more than one language, to be global citizens. So those list of all of those aims is outlines our mission statement. It's what we do. That takes us on to aims, objectives, strategies and tactics. The aim, as I've just given you the example, are the long-term goals of the organisation. They're usually the separate points listed in the mission statement. So in the case of ISM, to enable students to become academically successful, that's an aim. To enable students to communicate in more than one language, it's an aim. They're long-term goals. They're very broad, okay, and they're a bit vague. There's no sort of time constraint. There's no sort of measurable output from them. Whereas objectives are more short to medium term and have that specific targets. Okay, so a school's objective could be to achieve a 95% pass rate within 2 years. Well, that, for example, could be a specific objective of enabling students to become more academically successful. It's a specific measurable section. Objectives are SMART targets. Okay, so when we talk about SMART targets, we mean specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time constrained. So these are our objectives. So when we think about strategies and tactics, these are the steps that we take in order to try and achieve our objectives. So we have strategic steps and we have tactical steps. Okay, so strategic tend to be more long-term steps, whereas tactics tend to be short-term, day-to-day decisions in order to help achieve those same objectives. Sometimes we have to have ethical objectives. Now, it's important to be aware that socially responsible businesses are those that act morally towards their stakeholders. Okay, so we'll talk about stakeholders in a minute. Such as employees in the local community. These obligations are known as corporate social responsibility, or CSR. Okay, so having ethical objectives is about being socially responsible towards your various stakeholders. There are 3 types of the viewpoint towards ethical objectives. There are businesses that take the self-interest attitude, there are businesses that take the altruistic attitude, and there are businesses that take the strategic attitude. Businesses that are self-interested are businesses that outline from the beginning that it's not their job to solve society's problems. That's the government's job. That's what they pay taxes for. Self-interested businesses would outline that it is their role to make money, to be profitable towards and for their shareholders, and that is their interest. So they don't necessarily participate hugely in these ethical objectives, because ethical objectives will often cost money. Then we have the opposite, the altruistic attitude. And the altruistic attitude is businesses who actually put social responsibility before profit. And these businesses like the Body Shop, for example, who would purposefully choose to select a production process that is going to increase their costs, because that business opportunity that will increase their costs is a socially responsible decision. So, for example, the Body Shop makes a decision to not test on animals and to only use products that are not non-harmful to the environment, so non-chemical, organic products, etc. Well, those production processes are going to be more expensive, but they outline in their mission, in their vision, that this is the type of company they want to be. So they actually put those social responsibility aims above their profit-making aims. A strategic business is an interesting one, and this is probably where an awful lot of our big multinational corporations fit into it. The strategic attitude essentially says, well, we'll have ethical objectives, we will be corporately socially responsible if it benefits us. So if we can use being ethical to our advantage in marketing or in, our public relations, in our brand image, then we'll do it. But if being ethical doesn't really stand to cause an advantage to our business, then it's not really in our interests, so we're not going to participate. This is quite common for businesses, and an example of that would be the case study of McDonald's, who, when faced with public negativity through media portrayals like Super Size Me, the movie, they responded to public demands by broadening their food range to include things like fresh salads and healthy alternatives. So those social responsibility
activities came as a result because it benefited them in response to an external media pressure. Now, that's not to say that McDonald's don't take on other ethical objectives. Of course they do. We know that McDonald's staff are encouraged and in fact paid. Part of their role is to collect litter from their car parks and surrounding areas. And it's not just McDonald's litter that they pick up. It's all litter in order to try and keep their areas clean. This also benefits McDonald's because McDonald's customers want to visit a restaurant that is in a clean and pleasant environment. So there's different elements that come into ethical objectives, but an ethical objective is any objective that isn't strategically outlined to make money, but is there in order to try and provide a benefit to the wider community or the wider society, usually environmental or health-wise or educational, charity-esque, so on and so forth. Then we have the SWOT analysis. So this is still looking at organisational objectives. A SWOT analysis looks at the status of a business today, and it's separated into positive and negative and internal and external. So strengths and weaknesses are internal factors within the business, whereas opportunities and threats are external influences that affect the business. Strengths and opportunities are positive influences on the business, whereas weaknesses and threats are negative influences on the business. So examples of strengths that the business might identify in its own analysis is perhaps they have a unique selling point. Maybe they do something that no one else does. Maybe they've got great brand awareness and brand loyalty. Maybe they have excellent market share, or they've got a really good corporate image. Most of you have produced a SWOT analysis for your IA, and you'll have probably found that the strengths is what the managers talk about, what the company does well. The weaknesses, often more difficult for businesses to identify, looks at what the business internally isn't doing so well. So perhaps the business has a poor cash flow or liquidity problems. Maybe the business has limited sources of finance, or maybe the business has a poor location. Maybe it's not close to infrastructure areas like roads or other stores or high street areas. Perhaps they've got a restricted product range. Maybe they've had some negative publicity because of their products. These are weaknesses that refer to the current operations internally within the business. Opportunities are an interesting one because students often make mistakes when listing opportunities. They often would say that, an opportunity is something that the business is going to do. Well, that's not how we phrase an opportunity. An opportunity is actually something that's changed or happening in the world around the business that the business can take advantage of. Like an economic growth in a particular market. This is something that the business could take advantage of. Or looking at a new technological development, a new creation or an innovation that the business could take advantage of. Perhaps governments are going to introduce grants and subsidies or to provide opportunities for businesses to move into new sectors. This is something that the business can take advantage of. But you have to word these sections as from the external perspective of the business. It's what the business is going to take advantage of rather than the strategy that the business is actually taking. The threats, just like opportunities, are external to the business. So this might be things like economic recession. It might be things like rivals and competitors in the market. It could be things in the environment like natural disasters or disease. It could be things like pressure groups, which are protesters or campaigners that are protesting against a particular business action. It's important to note that with opportunities and threats, the business has no control over these, but they can take advantage of the opportunities and they can put strategies in place to try and avoid the threats. So the SWOT analysis is looking at the business's objectives from a current perspective. This is an analysis used to analyse where the business is today. And then we have the ANSOF matrix. This is another analysis tool. The analysis tool of the ANSOF matrix looks at how the business plans to grow. So this is looking at growth strategies. There are 4 sections of the Ansoff matrix, and they focus on the categories product and market. If your business is simply selling an existing product, the same product it currently sells, to an existing market, to the same market it currently sells in it, then this is called market penetration. Market penetration means doing what we do now, but seeing if we can do it any better. Examples of this would include, for example, sales or discounts, bringing in consumer loyalty cards in order to try and sell more of the same product. This is still selling the same thing that we currently sell to the same people that we're currently selling it, but trying to sell more of it. Perhaps we want to have a new advertising campaign or a sponsorship from somebody famous. Sometimes businesses will release new products and sell them to their existing market, to the same people they currently sell it to. This is called product development. Okay, this is quite common. Again, common would be market development, where businesses take their existing product that works in one place and sell it to a new market. That new market might be a foreign market, selling it overseas, but it might also be just simply trying to advertise and sell it to a different group of people in the same country or the same city or the same location that you currently sell your products to. So this is often to do with a change in advertising strategy in order to bring new customers on board. Diversification is the riskiest of all of the growth strategies. This is where businesses will sell new products into new markets. Okay, so businesses will develop new products and they will take them and sell them to completely new people. This has the greatest potential reward, but it's also the greatest risk strategy involved in business management. These are the first 3 sections: introduction to business management, types of organisations, and organisational objectives. The next clip will take you through the next 4 sections: stakeholders, external environment, growth and evolution, and organisational planning tools.